Have you ever watched someone who thinks they're invincible? The type who walks into a room with their chin slightly raised, eyes scanning others not with curiosity, but with condescension. They wear their ego like armor. But armor isn't unbreakable. It's heavy, rigid, and most importantly, predictable. And predictability, in the hands of a Machiavellian mind, is a weapon. What if I told you that breaking someone's ego isn't about yelling, threatening, or direct confrontation? It's about slipping into their mental blind spot, exploiting their deepest insecurities while they still think they are in control. The most dangerous manipulation is the one they never see coming, because it doesn't strike the surface. It dissolves the foundation. And that's what this is, a psychological autopsy of the human ego. Not to understand it, but to dismantle it, coldly, slowly, and with purpose. Machiavelli understood a brutal truth: people are not ruled by logic, but by pride. The ego is not just a self-image, it's a fragile illusion held together by praise, comparison, and control. When you threaten someone's ego, you threaten their entire identity. But here's the trick: if you attack it head-on, they'll resist. They'll double down. The ego survives through defense mechanisms: denial, projection, superiority. But if you bypass those defenses, if you lure the ego into revealing its own cracks, you can make the most arrogant man question himself. You don't destroy his ego by force. You make him destroy it himself. This is how the game begins. The first principle in Machiavellian ego breaking is mirroring with distortion. The ego thrives on validation, but it's addicted to the right kind of validation. When you mirror someone's confidence, but ever so slightly distort it, make it exaggerated, sarcastic, or artificial, you plant seeds of self-doubt. Compliment them in ways that feel off, a little too specific, too rehearsed. You're always the smartest one in the room, aren't you? It sounds like flattery. But it's bait. The ego hears praise, but the subconscious hears mockery. Now they are stuck between feeling validated and suspicious. That dissonance begins to crack the surface. The second tactic is strategic indifference. Nothing starves the ego more than silence. The inflated ego survives on reaction, whether admiration, resistance, or fear. But when you deny them those responses, when you treat their power like it's ordinary, their charisma like it's invisible, you trigger a spiral. They'll try harder to impress you. And the harder they try, the more desperate they look. You remain still, unmoved. And in that contrast, they begin to feel smaller. Because deep down, every ego craves control over how others perceive them. Your indifference is a mirror showing them they have none. Next comes false agreement, a subtle Machiavellian mind game that plays on their need to be right. Agree with their arrogance. But take it one step too far. When they say, "People just don't get how sharp I am," respond with, "True, it's like watching a genius trapped among cattle." You didn't insult them. But you exaggerated their delusion to the point of caricature. Now their ego feels exposed, because it recognizes the absurdity, but can't admit it without backtracking. You forced them into an emotional corner. They either accept the mockery or reject their own statement. One of the most potent ways to dismantle an ego is through psychological disqualification. The ego expects to be judged by ordinary standards: wealth, charm, intelligence. So you judge them by a standard they can't control. When they boast about money, you say, "Sure, but depth of character is rarer than success." When they flaunt their status, you say, "Yeah, but some people have peace." You're not attacking them, you're disqualifying their currency. You're changing the metric. And nothing enrages the ego more than being told its strengths don't matter. There's also the weapon of passive comparison, the Machiavellian art of subtle contrast. Bring up someone else, but only briefly. "You remind me of someone I used to know. He was brilliant, but never knew when to stop talking." The ego hears the compliment but chokes on the second half. You didn't accuse them, you recalled a memory. But now they feel associated with someone they don't want to resemble. This indirect pressure forces the ego to perform, to overcorrect, to spiral inward, trying to separate itself from the ghost you just introduced. And here's the core truth behind all these games: the ego is not strong. It only pretends to be. Its strength is theatrical. It relies on control, on applause, on having the upper hand. But when you slowly chip away at that, when you refuse to give it the stage, it begins to shrink. Not visibly, not dramatically. Quietly. Internally. You won't see the collapse at first. But you'll feel it, the shift in tone, the awkward laughter, the attempt to reset the frame. That's when you know the break has begun. But breaking the ego isn't just about subtle mind games, it's about timing. Machiavelli knew that the moment of greatest pride is also the moment of greatest vulnerability. When someone feels most secure in their image, right after a win, a compliment, a show of power, that's when you strike. Not directly, but through contradiction. When they bask in admiration, raise an eyebrow. Ask a question that destabilizes their self-narrative. You ever worry it's all just performance? Say it calmly. Say it like you're just wondering. But plant that seed and walk away. Let their ego water it. You must also understand the ego's addiction to dominance over others. So reverse it. Flip the hierarchy without confrontation. Mention someone below them doing something superior. You know Mark in accounting? Quiet guy, he's been doing some brilliant strategy work. You didn't compare them directly, but the ego hears it. Now they're competing with someone they deemed irrelevant. That forced comparison creates internal conflict. An ego, once divided against itself, starts to fracture. One of the most elegant Machiavellian moves is subtle exclusion. The ego wants to be in the loop, in the know, at the center. So exclude them, softly. Mention a conversation they weren't part of. Reference an inside joke. Share a story with others while they observe. Smile, then shift the topic when they join. Don't make it obvious. Just enough to remind them they are not essential. That they can be out of frame. It eats away at the ego's illusion of centrality. And if you want to watch someone unravel quietly, use invisible competition. Mention no rival. Just talk about values, traits, or achievements they don't possess, but others admire. There's something rare about people who stay calm under pressure, who don't need to prove anything. You didn't name anyone. But you named a standard they know they don't meet. The ego begins to itch, then burn. It wants to restore the balance, but you've said nothing it can attack. It can only boil internally. Let's be clear, this isn't about cruelty. It's about control. Breaking the ego isn't violence, it's psychological leverage. You don't break them to destroy them. You break them to reshape them, or render them powerless. Once the ego is cracked, the person becomes far more malleable. More open to suggestion. More dependent on your approval. That's when influence begins, not when you shout, but when they question themselves in your silence. The final form of this strategy is confusion layered with calm. The ego expects confrontation or compliance. It doesn't know how to deal with unpredictability. So give them kindness laced with condescension. Give them compliments followed by silence. Ask questions that sound sincere but hide barbs. How did you get so confident? Was it always natural, or something you built to survive? They'll smile at first, then pause. That pause is where the cracks widen. That pause is everything. Breaking someone's ego isn't about being louder. It's about being smarter. It's about stepping behind their mask and tugging at the strings that hold it in place. It's about knowing that pride is brittle, and silence is louder than insult. You don't need to fight their ego. You just need to show them it's not real, and let them do the rest. And the most Machiavellian part? When they finally change their behavior around you, when they become quieter, more agreeable, less inflated, you don't acknowledge it. You don't give them the relief of validation. You maintain your silence. because you're not there to heal their ego. You're there to own its collapse. To truly master the art of breaking anyone's ego, you must understand one critical dynamic. Ego is a social construct, sustained by external validation. The moment you disrupt that supply line, whether through silence, exclusion, or subtle undermining, you begin starving the ego. And starvation weakens faster than any direct attack ever could. This is why social isolation, even if only perceived, can be a slow poison to the ego. Humans, by nature, crave belonging. The ego thrives when it is surrounded by admirers or fearful followers. So if you can engineer a scenario where the person begins to doubt their social standing, even subtly, you are already halfway to breaking them. When they catch wind of whispered doubts, sideways glances, or the absence of expected praise, the ego begins to unravel internally, even if they never show it outwardly. Machiavelli knew well that power is not just about confrontation but about quiet subversion. Consider the most effective rulers and manipulators in history. They rarely attacked openly. They infiltrated confidence with subtle hints, planted doubt in allies' minds, and let the target self-destruct beneath the weight of their own insecurities. Your goal is the same: to become a ghost in their mind, an unresolved question, a shadow at the edge of their certainty. One of the most devastating Machiavellian mind games involves using their own words against them, but in a way they don't immediately recognize. People's egos are often rooted in repeated affirmations and self-assured phrases. When you can twist those affirmations into contradictions or ironic reflections, you destabilize the narrative they hold about themselves. For example, if someone prides themselves on being decisive, subtly question their recent choices with carefully framed questions. It's fascinating how decisiveness can sometimes look like stubbornness, don't you think? This plants a seed of doubt without outright accusation. Another critical method is the deployment of strategic ambiguity. The ego craves clarity. It wants to know where it stands, who it is, and how others perceive it. When you reply vaguely to direct challenges or compliments, you keep the ego guessing. This uncertainty gnaws at the ego's foundation. When asked, "Do you agree with me?" you answer with a non-committal. That's one way to see it. When complimented, you respond with a slight nod, no more. When accused, you say nothing at all. The uncertainty you generate is a psychological wedge that pries the ego apart from within. In conversations, the art of controlled distraction is invaluable. When the ego seeks to dominate the dialogue by boasting or debating, you redirect attention subtly but decisively. Change the subject with grace and brevity, or introduce an unrelated but striking fact. This tactic denies the ego its center stage, forcing it into the background. Over time, repeated exclusion from the spotlight causes the ego to diminish and grow desperate for attention it no longer controls. To dismantle ego on a deeper level, you must also exploit its dependency on control over others. The Machiavellian reverses this by demonstrating control over the environment or people the ego cares about. Subtle shows of influence, casual name drops of powerful allies, mentioning the loyalty of others, or even a quiet but firm refusal to yield, shift the balance. The ego, once master of the room, feels the shift and fights to regain it. But this fight, when expertly guided, leads it to reveal its vulnerabilities and fractures. At the core of breaking an ego lies the principle of emotional asymmetry. Never meet the ego's emotional intensity with equal force. Instead, respond with calm, detached confidence. When someone inflates their importance with loud gestures or anger, meet it with an unshaken gaze and a soft, almost dismissive tone. This causes cognitive dissonance. They expect fire and receive ice. The unexpected calmness makes them question their own emotional logic, undermining their sense of self. You can also use the weapon of indirect praise, an artful way to undermine through complimenting what the ego doesn't want to hear. Tell them, "Your humility is surprising for someone with your reputation," or "It's rare to see someone so confident who also listens carefully." These backhanded compliments are like psychological jabs disguised as kindness. The ego can't accept them outright, yet they echo in the mind, sowing seeds of uncertainty. Sometimes, breaking the ego requires slow erosion rather than quick strikes. The Machiavellian understands patience is power. Instead of trying to demolish the ego in one confrontation, use repeated, subtle undermining over time. Tiny contradictions, slight exclusions, ambiguous remarks, they accumulate. The ego begins to fatigue. It loses energy defending itself against countless small doubts. This method is invisible, elegant, and almost impossible to resist once the pattern is set. Another devastating tactic is controlled revelation, sharing information about yourself that creates envy or discomfort, but framed as if it's effortless or trivial. This unsettles the ego's sense of superiority. For example, casually mentioning a recent success without bragging, or a connection with a powerful person, reminds the ego that it is not at the pinnacle, no matter how loud it boasts. The ego wants to believe it's unique and untouchable. Your calm, effortless displays break that illusion. In personal relationships, breaking ego often involves withholding validation strategically. People with inflated egos constantly seek approval to reinforce their sense of self. You can deny this by giving attention only on your terms. Praise sparingly and unpredictably. Withdraw affection or respect when ego-driven behavior surfaces. This unpredictability keeps the ego off balance, desperate for the approval it can't control. Moreover, use the mirror of projection to your advantage. Often, the ego accuses others of the very flaws it hides. When you notice this, subtly call attention to their projection by asking reflective questions. Why do you think you see that in others? Or, could it be you reacting to something within yourself? These questions force the ego to confront its own contradictions without direct accusation, leading to internal conflict. Finally, Machiavellian ego breaking involves the art of exit. When you've done your work, when the ego is destabilized, do not cling to it. Walk away. Silence your involvement. The ego, craving control and validation, will try to chase you, seek reconciliation, or prove itself again, but by then, the damage is done. You've planted a seed of doubt that will grow far beyond your presence. Breaking anyone's ego is not about cruelty, it's about dominance. It's about knowing that beneath every loud, confident exterior lies a fragile core vulnerable to the right psychological pressure. It's about using silence, ambiguity, indifference, and subtle manipulation to unravel that core without fire or fury. It's about patience, precision, and ruthless strategic thinking. Remember, the ego is a mask, and the Machiavellian's goal is not to tear off the mask but to loosen its grip until it slips away on its own. When the ego falls, the person is no longer a threat but a potential ally, or a pawn. That is the power of psychological mastery.